next step in assembling the bottom of the Triumph engine is to look at the shock absorbers and do some checks and make sure that it's usable. One of the things we need to do is to make sure that the chain is not worn, or the teeth on the outside of the shock absorber. One of the ways to do that is to put the chain around and then look to see how much play there is, and there shouldn't be very much at all. This one is very good, but it looks like it's almost new. This is the one that actually came out of the engine. It has been around, as far as I remember, for the last 40 years, if not more. Of course, there's very little wear on it because the whole thing runs in oil. So there is no play on that. Some of the other things is within each of these shock absorbers there are 12 rubbers, and they actually do start to break down with the constant vibration compression and with the oil. So one of the things you need to do is obviously take the cover off and make some measurements. So we'll talk more about those when we get there. Now these two shock absorbers are very similar, and they are both short nose. This means that there is a spacer that goes onto the snout of the clutch that actually spaces this out correctly, and that spacer actually runs or provides a service for the oil seal that is in the inner primary chain case cover. The nose actually runs on the needle roller bearing in the inner cover and provides a support, effectively an outrigger bearing, for the clutch itself. I'm going to use this one because it is newer. This one is difficult perhaps to see, but one of the issues with these is that the rivets start to give way after a while, and you can see that this one has had some bodge welding to actually reinforce the inner spider. Now that's not a bad thing, and at least it's done at approximately 120 degrees so that the balance should be okay, and I have run that for many years without an issue. This one, however, as you can see, is much newer. It is tight in the middle, although we'll check that once we've actually disassembled the unit, because we will be putting new rubbers in. The spanner that I use to remove and tighten the clutch bolts also fits the bolts on the shock absorber. I've loosened all of these. Funny enough, having taken the tabs off, some of them were already loose. So whether whoever put this together hadn't got a modified spanner, or figured that the tab washers would stop the bolts rotating, or that the rotor inside is actually wider than the spec, so when they tightened it up, the centre locked to the outside. I don't know. However, one of the things to note with this assembly is that these tap washers are actually longer than the ones on the clutch. So why they did that is interesting. It would have been more economic to use the same length ones, but of course the spacing is probably different. Well, no, it's definitely different. As I'm going to be changing the shock absorber rubbers, the way I get the lid off is to hit the back with a hide mallet, and then that allows me to bring the top plate out. Now this is going to need some work because it's actually slightly rusty inside, and this has the old style shock absorber rubbers. You can see that the rubbers are actually starting to break up, so it's time to replace them anyway. I'm not sure that you can see that terribly well, but the rubbers are starting to disintegrate, and there is a certain amount of rust within here as well. So all of this is going to need to be cleared out. And the new rubbers actually fit in, fit in either side of the splines, and give a slightly different characteristic. There we go. So that shouldn't have been possible to press that out. So these rubbers, oh yeah, so these rubbers are definitely required replacing. In fact, they're as hard as rock. You can see that they're disintegrating. You can see that they're very different size and obviously a different shape, every other one, and I'm not sure why they changed, but they obviously did. Yeah, they are definitely due for a change. This unit will be cleaned, but there are some checks that you can do. The action, of course, is like that. Woo. One of the issues with these units is the gap between each of the vanes should be minimal to allow it to rotate, but not too small so that the rubber can actually get into the cracks and cause it to disintegrate. It should be better supported. So each of these gaps should be 20 thou or less, but according to the service notes in the Triumph and Rocket 3 Owners Club, they have seen 3 times that value. So I'm going to measure these. The other thing is that with the cover on tight, there should be some play to ensure that this turns freely with the cover tightened up. Now it may be that this one, which is why they perhaps had the bolts slightly loose, is not doing that. The other check is to ensure that all of the rivets are actually tight, which is why sometimes they actually put a bead of weld. Not sure that I'm going to do that. This surface should be clean and smooth. That's where the roll of thrust bearing runs on. So we shall see. So I will come back when I've cleaned this up before we start making the actual measurements. That is quite a mess. Removing the cover from the older shock absorber, you can see that it has the modern style of shock absorber rubbers. However, there is some slight signs of degradation around the edges of these, and as a precaution I would change, or will change, these rubbers as well, and measure the clearances to make sure that that's a good shock absorber. The metal parts of the shock absorber have cleaned up very well. The cover plate is interesting in that the holes are countersunk. I'm not sure, I've never seen that before, and there is no witness marks to show that this has actually been working. If we look in the older one, if we can get it apart, there are the shadows where the rubbers were, and in between are the marks where the spider legs or veins are have actually been moving against this plate. Not sure that this one has ever been used. The inside of the main body of the shock absorber also cleaned up quite nicely, and there are some checks that we can do. So I have actually marked the vein and the body because I have already made some measurements. The requirement is that the clearance between the the vane and the body should be less than 20 thou. This is a 25 thou feeler gauge, and it slips in. You could just feel a little bit of resistance towards the bottom, but this is the best I could do, which is why I have actually marked the spider and the outside, because some of the other positions were worse. The recommended cure to actually reduce this gap is to weld the end of each vane and then grind it back until you get the required clearance. I'm only just started learning to TIG weld, so I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon. The issue with that is that the rubbers, which will actually be sitting in there, are likely to actually start breaking up as they work their way through that gap. The projected life of the rubbers in one of these is something like 15,000 miles, and if they break up a little early, it's not the end of the world. You can hear the rumble coming from the bottom end, and change out the rubbers. So we can see that this rotates smoothly, and once we actually put the top on and bolt it down, it still rotates smoothly. One of the tests that we need to do is to make sure there is enough clearance, vertically in this case, between the rotor and the stator. So I've set up a dial gauge set to 0, and by moving the outside up and down, keeping it on the, let's reset that to 0, holding the stator down hard, we see approximately 12 thou. 12 thou is a very good measurement. So I'm quite happy now to put the rubbers in and to reassemble the unit. There is a tool that is actually shown in the workshop manual that allows you to tension the rubbers so that you can get them all in. It's always been a struggle, and I'm not quite looking forward to that. I do actually have the new tab washers, which are the correct length, should we get that far. I've managed to compress and fit the rubbers into the shock absorber. As I've got older, it seems that my muscle tone is not as strong as it used to be, and this was quite a struggle to get in. I have a made up tool that I use and I think the bar on that needs to be a good 20 feet longer. However, I'm now at a position where I can put the top on and then effectively install this in the bike. I am resting the shock absorber on the primary chain, so that the unit is supported by the outer body rather than actually resting on the nose of the spider, because in the past I've actually pushed down and with it resting on the nose it just pushes the spider out, and then you've got to start again, and that's not so much fun. The top cover effectively pushes on, but this is where you run into an issue, and then I use a small screwdriver to actually find the bolt holes. And you can see when you put the first bolt in, if it's actually going in at an angle, then you obviously need to move the plate. And this is always satisfying when you've got the stupid you've got to put the tab washers in. Otherwise you've got to take them out, take the screws out again and start again. I have bent up the end of the tab washers so that they're easier to start, to bend them over the little bolts. Once the bolts are reasonably tight, not fully tightened down, you can actually remove the chain and finally tighten down. But I like to check first to make sure that the rim is actually fitted in there correctly, and then do the final tight down. I tend to actually go round them bit by bit, make sure they all tighten down. There we got to. Make sure they all tighten down together. And then we will bend the tab washers up, having made sure they are, the nuts all, or bolts, sorry, all fully tight. Again, I haven't found a torque setting for these. However, the tab washers will actually stop the bolts from turning, so that's probably good enough. I've never had an issue with any of these bolts undoing. With all the tab washers bent down, I can now check to make sure that the rim is sat down properly. There is a little bit of a step there, but there always is, and on the back side we can see that the rim is actually within the body of the shock absorber, so that's now ready to go in. With the clutch installed and the push rod, always important to make sure you've got the push rod in, gets a bit embarrassing otherwise. The next stage is to put the inner cover on, and to do that we need a gasket. And before we put the gasket on, there's a couple of things to point out. One, the clutch housing is for T160, so it's got the tube for the gear change to come over to the left hand side. We're not actually using that. It does still have the same labyrinth seal, so this area has no fluids in it. It is actually vented to the clutch area, and there is a vent down here which is pretty standard, but this area is just vented through the ground, so if you actually get any rain in here, which actually can get down through it, can come out down here, and the gasket allows that. The main sealing area of the gasket is around the crankshaft, and there is a little bit of seal around the oil pump, although there is an O-ring that goes in here and there's another O-ring in the outer cover. One of the other things we need to do at this time, we'll put the gasket on first. I have applied a thin coating of grease to the gasket to allow it to, on both sides, to allow it to hold in place and hopefully release if and when we want to take this cover off, perhaps to get to the clutch. Okay, we may need to make sure that the hole for the spigot for the oil pump intermediate drive is actually aligned. These never seem to actually sit down straight for whatever reason. Okay, so what I need to do now is to talk about the inner chain case. Yeah, there is a needle roller bearing that in fact the spider runs on, and then inside there is an oil seal, and that oil seal, actually we'll put some oil on it. This internal oil seal is to protect the clutch from the oil that's actually held in the primary chain case. The seal actually runs on a spacer, because this is a narrow a short-nosed spider. Will actually fit the spacer in. There we go. So I know that the spigot for the oil pump intermediate drive is actually in the hole there, lined up, and that the spacer that actually fits in there is also in there. So now we can start fitting the various bolts. I am actually using an Allen screw, 5/16 UNC Allen screw. Of course the gasket's actually holding it. There we go, into there, and then there is the bolt that goes up there, which is again 5/16. All the rest of the screws are quarter UNC. Mostly they're an inch long, but there is one special one which is 3/4 of an inch long that goes in under there, and then all of the others, I think there's 7 of them, go in there. Now, one of the things about this is that there is a screw that on the T150 comes through from the other side, and it's countersink, and the breather cover on the T150 is on the other side of this clutch housing. But of course that's where the electric start goes, so they have to have a cover this side, and this bolt is not used. Interestingly, on the T160 it's not fitted or used or anything, so my feeling is that it's not a big issue, but we shall see. We start getting leaks or leaks on the clutch or whatever, then we might have to do something extraordinary for that. With the clutch installed in the engine and the inner primary drive cover fitted, I have fitted the shock absorber so that I can make some checks. And the first thing is to make sure that the clutch swings, and I've also check to make sure that the kickstart all works and everything. One of the things I'm going to do next is to put the electric start on, because I'm quite keen to see what happens, basically. I have temporarily bolted the electric start into the Trident bottom end, T150, and I'm using a relatively small battery and some crocodile clip wires, just to temporarily see what happens. Of course, no load on this, so the wires will get warm, but they shouldn't get too hot, and it should actually just spin the gearbox. There's no coupling to the rest of the engine. So here it goes. That spins quite nicely. It's going in the right direction, which is always a nice thing. Yeah, so I'm quite pleased with that. While I'm here, I should point out that the 2 O-rings are now fitted into the entrance for the oil pump. There's one on either side of the jointing face for the inner primary chain case, and you can see that I have fitted the oil pump gasket in the back. There is a dowel which is up in the top up there, and these oil pump gaskets only go one way round.